Modernizr is a JavaScript library that detects support for all of the new HTML5 and CSS3 features. So you wouldn't be remiss to assume that Modernizr actually upgrades these older browsers to provide support. But that's not what it does. It performs detection so that you can respond accordingly. So let's jump into it and see how we can use it. If we click on the download button, for production, you will want to create your own version of Modernizr using their build tool. And that way, the file size will be much smaller, and you're not performing tests on features or APIs that you won't be using. However, for development purposes, I recommend you use this version right here. So let's go ahead and bring that in. Now you will want to place this within the head of your document, and you'll want to do that for a couple of reasons. You might have read, or you might be in the habit of placing these at the bottom, because that way the page will appear to load faster. That's a smart idea and good in many cases. However, for Modernizr, you don't want to do that for a couple of reasons. First, Modernizr implements the HTML5 shim that we learned about in a previous lesson. So don't import both of those because it's already in Modernizr. And secondly, the way Modernizr works is it applies classes to the HTML tag based upon what the browser supports. So for example, if the browser supports local storage, it will apply a class of local storage. However, if it doesn't, if it's an older version of IE, the class will then be no-local storage. So you can imagine if you want to use box shadow, if you place the script at the bottom of the page and you're using these classes in your style sheets that are loaded at the top of the page, there could be what we call a flicker or a flash of content. Stick with best practice and place this within the head document and after your style sheets. Next, we're going to remove this class right here, and we're going to apply a class of no-js. And this is fairly common even outside of Modernizr. And the way this works is in browsers where JavaScript is disabled, this class will always be there, and you can use that in your style sheets accordingly. Maybe set something display none if it requires JS. Now, Modernizr, what it will do is replace this. If JavaScript is enabled and Modernizr is executing, it will take this class and replace it with JS, and then it will run its feature detection. So make sure you add that on. Okay, and with this alone, let's go and see what we get when we view it in the browser. Now, of course, we have a blank page, and if I view the source, you're not going to see anything. What we want to see is the generated tree. So I'm going to open up Chrome Developer Tools, and check it out. We have this new section right here, and this is all done because of Modernizr. First, it updates Node.js to JS, and then it applies a huge handful of classes, again, are dynamically generated based upon what the browser does or does not support. So here we can see this browser supports CSS 3D transforms. It supports web workers. This is a very advanced browser. I believe this is Chrome 16. However, watch what happens if we view this in Firefox 8. Here we are, and now you can see Firefox 2 is a great browser, but it doesn't support quite as much as Chrome in general. Here we can see no transforms 3D. This browser does not support it, so that is the format it takes. When it's supported, it gives it a name, and when it does not support it, it will have a class of no dash, then the name. So we can use this now within our style sheets accordingly. Let's say you want to work with the flexible box model with CSS. It's pretty neat. However, it doesn't have a huge amount of support yet. So what we can do here is, within our style sheet, we can say flexbox. And I want you to note I'm getting this class based upon right here. So if you forget the name, just open up Chrome Developer Tools and see what they called it. So in browsers that support flexible box model, you can use that. Or what you may find yourself doing more is looking for browsers that don't support the flexible box model, and then you can fall back to a float layout for whatever you're working with. Now, I want you to remember, this is the class of the HTML. So you wouldn't do it like this. You might do no flexbox, then get the container, and then you would apply the necessary floats or something like that. But what Modernizr does is it gives you those hooks to latch onto. Now, what if you're working with JavaScript? Well, it's going to be the same thing. We can access Modernizr via the global Modernizr object. So if I want to test support for local storage, we can see right here, it does support it. So now we can run if modernizr dot, and now this is the official way with the capital S. However, Modernizr will want that to be lowercase. So if modernizr.local storage, have fun. Or you can say if not, then provide a fallback or a polyfill. And we will cover that in the next lesson. Now, if we come back to the Modernizr website and we take a look at the documentation, I want you to take a look at a couple things. We can see here which browsers are supported, which feature detections are run. You can see if we're testing for border radius. Notice that the convention is it becomes lowercase. So border-radius would be tested with modernizr.border radius with no dash. If we take a look at this example right here, we can see that in browsers that don't support box shadow, we're going to apply a border just to add a little bit of depth. However, if they do support box shadows, we're going to remove the border and instead use new CSS3 box shadows to provide that. And this is a nice way to use Modernizr. Now, the last thing in this lesson I want you to take note of is what's going on underneath the hood. And this is always important to take a look for your own sanity. So remember how in the previous lesson we learned that if we want to test for geolocation support, we can say if navigator.geolocation. Well, let's see what Modernizr does. If we scroll back and we view the source, I'm going to search for geolocation, and you can see right here, here is the test. He adds a new function to the test object called geolocation, and take a look, it does the same thing as ours. It returns navigator.geolocation, and that's because it's one of the easiest ones to detect. But what you'll find is for other tests, you have to do some different things. So for example, here we're testing for web SQL database support, and that too needs to be run through a try statement. So that's what's nice about this. Modernizr runs all of these feature tests for you so that you don't have to worry about it. You can focus on your web application and less on browser quirks. So now we've learned about how to detect support, how to work with it in our CSS, and how to work with it in our JavaScript. In this case, rather than navigator.geolocation, we would do modernizr.geolocation. So now we've learned some browser will not support geolocation. We want to provide a fallback or a polyfill. How would we do that?